Hello, this is just a short progress update on the game I'm working on, my passion project named Shudderfly. This is just a short replacement for a devlog of which I initially planned to make, but I didn't have time to make a fully edited video. To those who don't know my game, the hook of my game's gameplay is that it's a game with a movement system derivative of Least of Painful, while having a unique art style and an incredibly unique battle system and progression system, which I'll get into later. Story on the surface is that the world takes place in a rather apocalyptic situation in the far future, where the world is being riddled by monsters called Fleshies, and people are trying to hunt them down. A situation like this ruined the world before, and they're trying to prevent it from reaching that point. As for the actual story, behind the false front of the narrative, it is a war between two masterminds of which far surpass what is commonly perceived as possible. One of them tricks people's minds, and the other tricks people's hearts. As for who is which, that's a mystery. The narrative is similar in vibe to 20th Century Boys, but instead of being dragged into a conspiracy from the outside, it's about seeing the perspective of people in the inside of the conspiracy. As for things to talk about, there is the new progression system, changes with the Fleshies, me making a plugin for the first time, difficulty modifier changes, and the next build. Let's talk about the new progression system first. As for what's in the current established progression system, well, first you have to know about Fleshies. Fleshies are the monsters that are scattered around the world. Those are the monsters that are causing the apocalyptic situation. And basically you hunt them down and you sell their meat for money. In abattoirs, as you can see here, in abattoirs you can use the money to buy items or rest at inns. And you can also use the fleshy meat itself to trade for other things, because some people trade the fleshy meat itself as its own currency separate from money. In the old progression system, how I balanced each area and the progression of it was basically that you had to fight pretty much all enemies in an area to gather enough EXP, as leveling up will give you better stats and new skills that will give you tools to go against whatever the future enemies can do. Since EXP is limited, it's a benefit that there's no grinding, but trying to do it this way where I kind of mandate the player to defeat all enemies to properly progress, or at least do a lot of fights that are similar, that kind of gives a similar vibe as grinding. It's just that I have better control over it, and I didn't like that, so I invented this new progression system, which pretty much revolves around doing favors for Clefa. Clefa will sell better equipment if you do what she asks. Each task will involve you doing something main story related and give you somewhat necessary information to understand what's going on. Some areas will have enemies that are just straight up stronger and can't be beaten unless you have equipment that makes you strong enough. As you can see here, I made a small diagram at the bottom where weaker weapons will completely make you unable to beat higher enemies. That is because fights don't give EXP anymore, and I'll get into that later. As for the tasks that Clefa will give you, there will be full-on stories in each of these tasks. And it will take some time for me to make the actual event, so I've made some placeholder storyboards to summarize the things happening in events, as I didn't make the whole events but just presentations on what happened as a placeholder. These are from some that I thought looked kinda aight. Some things I took note of to prevent sequence breaking is that if you don't have strong enough equipment, then you deal only 0 damage to any enemy whatsoever. No status effect can deal a finishing blow to an enemy. Add-ons will not be able to boost attack or intelligence, which are like the stats that will affect how much damage you do, because that will make sequence breaking possible. Add-ons are basically like the accessories that you can equip. Going back to levels, let's talk about XDA bounty hubs. XDA bounty hubs will have lists of targets for the player. Each time a target is got, the player gets a serving of luxury tea, which makes all party members' levels get added by 1. This includes party members you haven't gotten yet. In the meanwhile, leveling up does not change stats, only unlocks new skills for characters. This allows the player to be very flexible with which party members they can use at any time. Since everybody is at the same level, it is now possible to have different teams for different enemies in a consecutive amount of battles. It's also going to promote trying out more teams, since you won't be restricted with the amount of levels you have. You won't be restricted by using only the team members that you have leveled up. Let's talk about the changes to Fleshies then. I made most Fleshies now optional. Since it is no longer mandatory to fight all enemies in an area, I decided to make most Fleshies now optional. You can choose to ignore them, but if you don't hunt them down early on, another mercenary would have taken them out in your place, preventing people from just stockpiling weak Fleshies for money, and giving them some decision between hunting Fleshies at the risk of damage or ignoring them for less money. Now then, let's talk about me making a plugin for the first time. The plugin I made is in RPG Maker MV, which is the game engine I'm using. RPG Maker MV has these things called plugins, which basically allow you to do things that aren't normally possible in engine. The plugin I made is very simple. It allows me to make the sprite of an enemy different depending on whether or not a certain switch is on or off. Before having this plugin, I've had to make different troops for each time I want an enemy to have an alternate appearance. Specifically, I use this to censor nudity. As you can see, these are some sprites that have been censored. The normal variants just have dick balls and tits out. Not needing to make a new enemy for a different sprite variation, that is actually like super useful, so I'm very glad I was able to make this. In all seriousness though, I didn't make it. The truth of the matter is that I got ChatGPT to make it. I saw a video by a YouTuber named Doug where he asked ChatGPT for code to try and make a game like Snake. And that gave me an idea to try and make plugins with it. Though amongst all the plugins I asked it to make, only one worked, and that's the one I just spoke about. Next up, I'll talk about the difficulty modifier changes. The things that you could add onto your playthrough for a harder challenge is no ins, no revival items, and single-use save points. No ins and no revival items together, that would make the game pretty much permadeath, and each time a party member faints, it's gone forever. I might change no ins to nerfed ins because I could imagine story scenes that take place inside an inn, so it would be weird if ins are only not closed during story scenes. So for nerfed ins just won't heal or revive party members at all, but do refill all SP or TP. Will nerfed ins be any useful in this case? Skills cost SP and TP, and it's very hard to control how much SP or TP one has at the start of a battle. The specifics of this is because in battle, the player has an option to slightly recover a character's TP and SP at the cost of their action that turn, and timing all party members' TP and SP to be full before dealing the final blow to an enemy is difficult because trying to do this without careful consideration would put you in a risky position. Sometimes the difficulty of a fight depends on whether or not your SP or TP is filled. I've been adding ways to make that less of a problem, to make fights more consistent and less chaotic. Resource management will still be important though. There's a mechanic with ins, however, where the more you use them, the more they get expensive. Without nerfed ins, this starts only the moment the player becomes level 3. However, with nerfed ins, the inflation of in prices will start immediately. Lastly, let's talk about the next build. As for the progress, I tried to get a build with all the core gameplay elements done by the Anabarge. But I've been told to expect that the time you make something is twice you'd expect it to be. The gameplay aspect was actually completed at one point, but when I added on the fixes to some problems I had, it added more to do, and that's what's left. I've completed all the systems, but what's left for me is creating the things in the gameplay. For the new narrative beats, I'm super proud of it. It will tell the player a bit about Igor, Yvonne, and Khalifa. They are some of the characters who are most relevant in the story. As for what's next, I tried to get out a build with the new placeholder assets, fully balanced and ready to be played. I'll put it in the Shudderfly archive in itch.io, which is an archive of past versions of the game for people to see. The latest version of the game is not there, but it is in the game's Discord, so check it out if interested. I'll leave all the links in the description.